If you had to describe the concept of regions, just the idea of regions, to a new student walking into class, what would you say? How would you describe regions? Are they all the same? Are they all different? How can you identify them? Alright, our objective today is that you will use the sources from this unit to complete a writing assessment. So you're going to be writing a thesis today using the sources from this unit. Alright, so we've looked at this before, but I have updated a little bit just to kind of recover the parts that several students struggled with. So please don't just skip through it, actually watch this. So what is a thesis? A thesis is a statement or a theory that's put forward as a premise to be maintained or proved. So it's your claim. It's like you stating a fact, okay? And so this fact or this statement or this thesis that you're claiming is going to be about regional boundaries. So this time we're going to review the claim for the last unit through the eyes of the thesis generator. So we looked at a thesis generator on our last writing assessment, but it used like a whole different claim that had nothing to do with our class. This time we're going to use last unit's claim so that it can be more clear for you. This example should help you use our current unit's claim to write your thesis. Alright, so I took our claim from our last unit and I put that in the thesis generator this time. So you know exactly what I'm talking about as I go through each step. So what is your topic? So for last unit, our topic was, do map makers make maps to identify the locations of places? And you had to choose whether you agree, disagree, want to revise it, right? Our topic for this one is, do regional boundaries separate places that are completely different from each other, right? And that's on your worksheet. So what is your stance or claim? So for our last unit, it would have said either map makers don't just do that, they make maps to show data, or whatever claim you were saying, right? So I'm just giving you an example here. So the question was, do map makers make maps to identify the locations of places? My stance would have been, map makers don't just do that, they make maps to show data. What is your rationale? What's your reasoning? Why is that your stance, right? So for this example, on last unit's claim, you could have said, well, the reason that map makers don't just do that I think they make maps to show data, is that several sources we viewed showed data and did not identify the locations of places. Number 4 says, what concessions will you make to qualify your stance and acknowledge opposition? So this is wordy, but what it's asking you is, what counterclaim will you acknowledge exists? What would someone argue against what your stance is, right? So for this one I put, although some would say that the maps showing data were still maps and therefore did identify locations, right? And then number 5 is just asking you to use the answers you put for number 1, 2, 3, and 4 and put them together to make a thesis, right? So your qualification plus your stance plus your rationale will make a thesis. Doesn't matter if you do it in that same order, because sometimes that order doesn't sound right and you have to mix it up. Right? So I put the 4 together and they're not in the same order. So I said, map makers do more than just make maps to identify the locations of places. Although some would say that maps that are made to show data are still maps and therefore do identify locations, and then I added a citation, as seen in sources 12, 13, and 14. The purpose of these maps was to show data and not to identify the location of places. Right? So that is my thesis. So that's all I'm asking you guys to do, except this time we're using a different claim, right? I'm showing you an example from last unit. If you look at your worksheet, this is what it looks like with color, but the top sections where it explains step 1, 2, 3, and 4, a couple of you had confusion on, so I'm just going to explain. This part is just telling you what you're doing. You don't have to write anything in there, okay? This section tells you what you'll be doing on this worksheet. The rest of the worksheet provides space for you to do it. So for example, step 1, you're just examining the claim. That's all you're doing is reading your claim. Step 2, it gives you room to do it right here. Step 2. Don't just write source 3 and source 7. It says examples from the sources. So give me your support that you could use in a thesis or maybe even eventually in an essay, right? What support? What does it say or show you in that source? Step 3, again, this is what challenges the claim. So don't just write source 4 or source 8. The claim says regional boundaries separate places that are completely different from each other. What can you find in our evidence that challenges that or goes against that, right? We're looking at the initial claim. Then in the thesis generator, this is when you're going to come up with your own claim. You are taking your stance. It may support the initial claim, but it might sound different from the initial claim, right? So use the thesis, we just went over it, and then down here, write your actual thesis. It'll be like 3 sentences-ish, anywhere from like 2 to 5, really. Okay? That has to be done. That's the whole purpose of this writing assignment, is to come up with a thesis. All right, get started. You have the worksheet in front of you. It needs to be submitted on Canvas.